Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening wherever you are. I hope that you are all well. Down below in the description box, if you happen to enjoy this video and like what you are hearing, you can buy me a coffee. It would be much appreciated as it helps me and the channel out. Also, for just $1.99 a month, you can become a member of Back to Ashes. Perks include getting videos released a day early exclusively to you and priority responses in the comments section, plus more. That link is also in the description box. I'd like to thank you all once more for being so supportive during this time of my recovery. Day by day, everything gets better. Please keep in mind that as of Thursday, we will be going back to our regularly scheduled program where members receive their videos first and then everyone else gets to see it the day after. With that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For when we return to the ashes, we arise a bigger, brighter, happier person in the morning. Now, sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in to get warm and enjoy this dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Paranormal Stories. I am a firm believer in ghosts and whatnot. I moved into my house when I was younger, and it seemed like a normal house, but I felt like I've been there before. I knew where and what everything was, and everything was super familiar, even though I've never set foot in that house. A few months later, I had dreams of me wandering the house. These dreams probably didn't mean anything, but every couple nights, I would get a dream of me wandering the house, and these dreams felt so real. In these dreams, I never felt alone, and whenever I turned my head, I would see something peeking at me. The dreams stopped after a while, but I always felt like I wasn't alone in any room. My dogs would bark at corners in the house, and my older sister claimed to feel something living in her room. Nothing really happened in the house until a couple years ago. I always thought I heard whispering whenever I was alone in the house. I've always been paranoid, so I thought it was just in my head. Then I saw shadows when no one was around. Objects like balls would roll on their own. I thought it was just the wind moving them, but then the dogs would come up and sniff and bark at something next to the ball. Other objects would be in different places, like stuffed animals or the TV remote. I also would hear running and footsteps sometimes, always seeming to run to my location wherever I was in the house. I would try and tell my family about this stuff, but only my older sister believed me. The stuff that I was seeing never happened to her, but she could feel a presence at her room at all times. But one of the weirdest things happened when I moved into the room downstairs. The room in our basement is the biggest room in our house. And since I was the last kid living at home at the time, my parents decided my privacy would do me some good and let me have it. There is a back door down there that connects to the backyard that I keep locked because it makes me feel safe. Sometimes I'll exit through that door to go out and pick up the dog's droppings or get some fresh air or whatever. Most of the time, I'll lock the door back up, but of course there have been occasions where I have forgotten to lock the door. When I do forget to lock the door and I'm getting ready to go to sleep, I'll hear this sort of tapping. The tapping only happens when the door is unlocked. At first, The tapping sounds like it's outside, but when I get up and go to the door to investigate, it sounds like the tapping is coming from somewhere else. When I lock the door, the tapping stops immediately. I don't know if this is some reminder telling me to lock the door or something else entirely. Keep in mind, most of this stuff happens when I'm alone. It only happens to me. And if I am with someone and I hear whispers or footsteps, no one else seems to be able to hear it. I don't know if this is a friendly entity or something malicious, but it hasn't hurt anyone yet. But if it is malicious, it's either targeting me, since I'm the only one who this happens to, or something else is going on or about to happen. This house is also fairly new and has had only one other family live in it, but no one in that family died in the house. My sister says it could be the ghost of my biological father. I am adopted and he passed away when I was a baby, but I don't think it's him. I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts about this whole ordeal? Any sort of info on this would be most appreciated before something either happens or my paranoia takes over and drives me insane. Last week, I posted about waking up to a shadow man standing over my bed that even my wife saw. I had a decent amount of people commenting on it, but deleted the post within hours out of fear that acknowledging and discussing it would make it worse. 2 days after I made the initial post, we had 2 more unusual experiences. The first was in the morning. My wife got out of bed to get ready for the day and put our son's baby blanket, who passed away a few weeks old from a terminal illness last year, next to my neck. I was awake, but scrolling on my phone for a few minutes before getting out of bed, and the baby blanket slid off my neck and onto the bed. A few minutes later, while I'm still laying in bed, my wife walks into the room from the kitchen with the blanket in her hand, asking me how it got onto the kitchen table. It was impossible for either of us to have done it, as she left the blanket with me and left the room, and I never got out of bed. It teleported somehow. The second was when we got home from therapy that night, where we met with other parents who have lost a child. We walked into the house, and a flashlight was in the middle of the kitchen floor, turned on and pointed at the ceiling. We were both creeped out, but put it back in its drawer and went on with our night. Tonight, I just finished cleaning the garage. I walk into the house and up the stairs into the kitchen. I look in the fridge for a quick bite to eat, then look over at the wall next to the stairs, and I saw the shadow man in the exact spot he was in my dream, before I woke up to him in my bedroom the other night. The only thing is, it was my own shadow cast on the wall, and this shadow can only occur because the light above the stairs just burnt out. And it will only be there when just the light above our sink is on. This really creeped me out when I realized this, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. Kind of wondering if the shadow man could be me from the future. Maybe trying to tell me something? Kind of like the movie Interstellar. We've had many experiences, but one we had a year ago sticks out right now. I was in the basement having a few drinks with a couple of friends, and the light above our bar switched off. It's a mechanical switch, and nobody was within 20 feet of it. I'm not an alcoholic, but if I were, future me trying to give present me a sign to stop drinking, that would be it. So maybe another sign if it's future me. In the event that it is not me, I did take the advice of the few comments made on my previous post and no longer fear this thing, and have voiced that it is unwelcome unless it is one of my loved ones coming back to visit. I know most of you here have had many experiences of your own, so feel free to share anything you have experienced with shadow men, the loss of loved ones, etc. I am writing this in hopes that someone with a similar experience or experiences will come forward and validate what I experienced. When I was about 22 years old, I was hanging out with a friend at the front of my house. Me and my friend, Jay, were just chilling in my car, smoking some weed and having a conversation. This is California, around 2015. After chilling for about an hour, we both looked at the full moon while still sitting inside my car. As I was staring at the full moon, I began to see certain shapes and forms appear on the face of the moon itself. The shapes appeared to be made out of some type of concentrated flowing energy. I thought nothing of it initially because maybe I just had something in my eye. As I continued to focus on the full moon, I was witnessing the energy develop into a variety of different shapes. It first formed a full circle, then a perfectly equal triangle appeared within the circle, with each point touching a part of the circle itself. Then a circle appeared within that triangle. The edges of the shapes were glowing and flowing, almost like electricity, but was strangely more tame and controlled than any electricity I have ever seen. As I continued to focus on the strange phenomenon I was witnessing, I noticed that within the innermost circle, I could see a blue sky with clouds. My first thought was that maybe I was seeing a glimpse of heaven. In my head, I kept hearing a voice that was telling me that if I continued to look, I would die. But I continued to look because I was really interested in knowing what was going on. The whole time I was hearing the voice, I was seeing things within the innermost circle, such as a really long scroll with writing that appeared Arabic or Hebrew. I wanted to look to continue, but after about 10 seconds, I felt my heart stop. I freaked out and I looked away. My heart started beating again. I tried to look back at the full moon, but the phenomenon had disappeared. I asked my friend Jay if he had also seen something odd on the moon, and he said he did not see it. I still do not know what I have seen to this day. I hope someone can come forward with some insight into what the hell it was I saw that night. I used to be a tour guide in a popular tourist town in Tennessee. My job at the time was to take people on a circuitous 2-mile walk around the town, telling them the ghost stories of the people who had lived there. During the summer, tours started a little before sundown and would end well after dark. All in all, it would take us roughly 1 to 2 hours to get through a tour, depending on the walking speed of my group. Just to preface this, the vast majority of stories we told were not true. They were either largely exaggerated, entirely fabricated, or simply gruesome stories of local murders with a paranormal twist added at the end with the ghost of the killer still lurking about. I didn't write the script, don't blame me. In fact, I visited a local museum and sourced authentic ghost stories from a curator in order to add a few of my own to the tour, which were actually authentic. That said, there were a handful of times during my stint as a tour guide in which I had experiences that were not so easily explained. In this story, I'm going to detail 3 of the most interesting ones. Story 1. One of the tools we got for our tours were EMF detectors, which I'm sure you're mostly all familiar with. They're intended to scan for electromagnetic frequencies and will detect the relative strength of a signal they pick up. Now, just because one of these things goes off doesn't mean you're seeing a ghost. They also pick up power lines and will go off like crazy near a generator. But if you're in the middle of nowhere and you suddenly get a strong signal, it's worth looking into. Now, these detectors we used had about 5 lights on them, changing in hue from green to yellow to red. Red meant no signal, and green indicates a strong signal. The light never goes below red unless you turn the thing off. That's the baseline. At the end of our tour, we would come to an old graveyard. Nobody's been buried there in at least 100 years. After I did my thing with the final story, people would wander around and look at the graves with flashlights and scare themselves shitless. But one night, as they were wandering, a man called me over to see one of the graves. I went over and had a look and saw what the problem was. Whenever he passed his EMF detector over this particular grave, all the lights would turn off. The entire machine would turn itself off when it was over this grave and turn back on as soon as you moved it away. We tried with a couple other graves, but only this one had the effect. We were curious about the grave, so we tried to read the name of the person, but the headstone was too worn down for us to read it. The first name, Thomas, was faintly able to be read, but the surname was too hard to read. We had the whole group, 5 people, leaning over it at this point, trying to read it, when We all heard the same thing. As one of the group wondered aloud what the man's surname was, a loud voice from behind us shouted, "Whaley!" As you may have guessed, there was nobody behind us when we turned around, and we called the tour to a close shortly after that. I never messed with that specific grave again, except to place flowers on it one time, as was my habit every once in a while since nobody visited that place anymore. Story 2. At the end of the tour, sometimes I would get tips if people had fun and got spooked. Older boomer and Gen X men really enjoy the charade of the covert handshake tip, where they palm you the money as they shake your hand. I always indulged the bit because, hey, I was getting a tip. One tour I ran had a family of 3, a mother, father, and daughter, and an older man who I initially thought was Grandpa, but later learned had been lumped into their group because we didn't run solo tours. The old guy was pretty quiet throughout the tour, but would occasionally ask very pointed questions that stood out to me as odd. I don't remember most of his questions anymore. This was years ago. But one example is that I was telling a story of a girl who fell from a balcony and her ghost haunts the river she plummeted into to this day. And he asked me if I thought she died right away when she hit the ground, or whether I thought she died slow and suffered. Just weird things like that. Well, at the end of the tour, the family took off into the graves to have a look about, to see if ghosts would show up in their pictures, etc. The old man came to give me that typical handshake, and mentally I was thinking that all his weird behavior could be easily forgotten if he tipped well. The handshake was normal, except that his hand was ice cold. But old folks have cold hands, so I didn't think about it very much. Except he didn't palm me $1. He palmed me a coin. I thought it was a $50 when I felt it at first, but it was too big. I turned to glance at the guy as he walked past me to leave, and I shit you not, he was just gone. The path leaving the graveyard was downhill, and you had visibility from the top for at least 300 feet. There was no way he could have covered that distance in that time, and I didn't even hear running. Just this old, tottering man in front of me 1 second and gone in the blink of an eye when he walked past me. When I got home and looked up the coin, I learned it was a 1 troy ounce silver bullion, minted to an older year. I don't remember exactly. I can check the year when I get home this evening if anyone cares. Overall, the experience left me a little shocked, and the family agreed he was really odd when I walked them back to their car. Apparently, the guy greeted their daughter by name when they arrived at the meetup spot a few minutes before me, but they had no idea who that man was. Story 3. So, 2 weird experiences, but no ghostly apparitions or demonic screams. Unfortunately, most nights on the ghost tour were entirely mundane. However, I have got one more odd story I experienced which really set my belief of ghosts in stone. One of the earlier stops in our tour was an old cabin where the town's progenitor once lived. The cabin has been moved around a couple of times to build parking garages, but has since been placed back on its original spot. We don't actually have a photo of the woman who founded the town, but we have got pictures of her granddaughter, who everyone at the time swore was a dead ringer for her grandmother. Because of this, an old black and white photo of her granddaughter is on the sign outside the cabin. The cabin is kept locked up with a padlock at all times, except when the Historical Society opens it up for school groups. The windows are so dirty you cannot see inside, and most of the time, it's too dark to get a decent look inside anyway. Regardless, I like to encourage people to peek through the cracks in the old wood, because they'd psych themselves into thinking they saw something move. And a spooky tour is a tour with good tips. Anyway, one night, after I did the whole spiel about her founding the town and how people say they can see her ghost within the cabin on some nights to this day, I let them all have a go at peeking inside. One of the younger teens in the group approached me after looking inside. We had a very odd conversation. These kids, I think they were 13 to 16, usually think it makes them cool to be skeptical and show everyone they're not scared. So, he asked me something like, who's in the costume? I was a little confused and explained how the photo on the sign is a picture of the granddaughter of the town's founder, but that she wasn't wearing a costume. That was how people dressed at the time. The little shit rolled his eyes and told me he meant the woman in the cabin. Of course, I had to have a look, so I peeked through, and sure enough, a streetlight was shining through the dirty windows and letting in a diffused sort of light, and you could just make out a figure in a rocking chair sitting in the corner of the dark cabin, rocking back and forth. It was hard to get a good look at her, but from what I saw, she did look just like the woman in the photo. I moved the group on pretty fast because, quite frankly, I was a little afraid it was a homeless person who had broken in somehow. If it was, I had a group of 6 kids and 1 parent. Homeschoolers, I think. I didn't want anyone getting hurt or snatched. But I stopped by the cabin again on the way to my car, and the lock was on tight and undamaged. I peeked inside again, and there wasn't even a rocking chair in the cabin. In the whole time I worked the tour route, roughly 2 years, I never saw a chair in that cabin again, or any old women for that matter. So anyway, those are just 3 of my stories. I know they aren't as sensational as some, but I thought I'd share my experiences with these paranormal encounters. Hello. I just wanted to share my experiences since we bought our home in 2020 when the world was shut down. I have had other small things happen shortly after the deaths of each of my grandparents, but that is a story for another time. Anyway, so we purchased our first house in April of 2020. I'm a 32-year-old male and my wife is 27. The house was built in 1922, and the thought crossed my mind, we may see or hear things, but it has never really bothered me in the past. The first thing that happened to me here was the most extreme experience I have ever had. My wife likes to collect those limited edition Starbucks cups, and they open at 5 a.m. the day they were being released, and it's first come, first served. So she leaves the house a little after 4 a.m. to go get them. As soon as she left, I hear her driving down the driveway. I got this very weird feeling I wasn't alone, and felt like something was watching me. I laid there for a bit and brushed it off as me getting into my own head and managed to fall back asleep. Now, I have a habit of lucid dreaming or having extremely real feeling dreams. And this time, my dream starts as me sleeping in bed in our bedroom in the new house. There was this very angry dark figure with a lady's voice starting to yell at me, and I woke up and couldn't move. I can't recall anything that was said, if it was even intelligible. I felt this strong force pushing down on my entire body, dragging me off the bed feet first. Once I was on the floor, I was in a position where my head and shoulders were against the wall, and the rest of me was on the floor, still with the same pressure, like someone was holding me down on the ground, and I couldn't move, all while the yelling was occurring. Then I woke up thinking I was on the floor, and took a few seconds to realize I was still in my bed, shaking, out of breath. I think I was yelling in my sleep too. Still with that strong, weird feeling I wasn't alone. Luckily, it was almost dawn, so I just got up for the day. Once it became light out, the feeling went away. We burned sage that day, and everything seemed to be fine. My second experience here was about a year later. A combination of things happened. My wife witnessed one of our cats hissing at what appeared to be nothing. A few days later, she had left for work on a Saturday and I was at home. I walked down into the basement to check how much oil we had left because it had been cold for a couple of weeks. When I go back to the center of the basement, heading toward the stairs, I hear 3 very loud knocks, almost like someone knocking very loudly on the front door. But it sounded like it was directly above me, which is where I would have been in the main hallway upstairs right by the living room. I headed upstairs and checked both doors, and there was nothing there. All the cats were on the bed or cat tree, plus a cat couldn't have made those sounds. That night, we burned a lot more sage throughout the entire house, and everything has been quiet since then. The only common factor here is that we were alone for every encounter. We never have experienced anything together. Either way, I am not too worried. This stuff doesn't bother me too much. If it takes some sage once a year or so, that's fine by me. But that's my experiences with the paranormal here, thus far. About 6 months ago, my girlfriend and I stayed at the St. James Hotel in Red Wing, Minnesota. I had heard stories about it being haunted before, and was curious, but was mostly there for the beauty and history of the place. When we got to our room, I did a little Google search to read up on the history and came across a page talking about it being haunted. It said that the third floor was considered the most haunted. We so happened to be on the third floor. Then, it explained that the third floor had been the residence of the old hotel owner, and room 310 was her room. Guess what? We were staying in that exact room. Room number 310. The article didn't say anything about what she does to the room itself, but it said that she is active in the dining room, moving tables and silverware around. So I didn't know what to expect. The room has those fancy curtains that hang straight down and that you hook up with hooks and loops in the back. They look kind of scalloped when they are up. When we woke up in the morning, some of the hooks and loops had been torn down and broken, like someone had pulled on the curtain with some force. Others had been adjusted to be lower than they were originally. We hadn't heard anything during the night, and you need a step stool to reach the curtains in the first place. But that stool was in the same place it was when we checked in. The two windows facing the main road were fine, while the other two on the side had been messed with. My girlfriend swears up and down that she didn't do it. She's too short anyway, plus I'm a light sleeper and would have hurt her. And it's probably just a coincidence, but an hour after we checked in, the door to a closet had already swung open. We joked that the lady of the house saw two lesbians walk in her room and decided to open a closet for us to go back to where we had come from. We were spooked and still had to stay a night after that with our homophobic ghost friend, but nothing else happened. The hotel is beautiful, even if it was a heavy, eerie feeling everywhere. Apparently, there are a lot of other ghosts there besides this one, who we found out is named Clara. Ending side note. I'm not out here actually thinking a ghost is homophobic because of a silly closet door being opened. Here is a quick overview on myself and the who, why, what, etc. that leads to what happened. I am an artist living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I paint ceiling murals for a restaurant group, traveling to different locations around the United States. I paint script of full books on ceilings for this restaurant group. It's pretty cool. My wife and I were in Atlanta, Georgia, back in early 2016. She read to me. I wrote. We worked at night. Usually got to the job at around 6:30 p.m. I think it was the second or third week of May. We got coffee, went in through the side door, and talked until the last construction worker left. I started working around 7:45 p.m. I set up the ladder and had to prime a wall section above the bar area. I had a 3-inch brush, a gallon of flat beige color paint, and a 9-inch roller set up. I started cutting the wall in and worked for no more than 20 minutes. My wife said she was going to change into different clothes in our van in the parking deck. I worked for another 4 to 5 minutes and put my brush down on top of the paint bucket. I get down from the ladder to smoke a cigarette, and then all of a sudden, I wake up laying on one of the bench seats across the restaurant. Looking back up at my wall as I stepped off the ladder was my last memory. The lights in the place were all flashing in succession with each other. I was freaking scared. It was like a scary movie. I didn't see my wife. I looked at my phone. 2.5 hours had gone by. I called for her, called on the phone. No answer. I immediately went to the parking garage, got to our van, and she was just waking up in the back of it, in our little sitting space. This was not like us. We just don't both fall asleep out of nowhere, at the same time no less. And we have been used to the work all night, sleep all day since February. She had looked at her phone and freaked out due to how long she had been asleep. She also didn't remember falling asleep, same as me. On the way back up to the job, I explained to her about the lights flashing, and we talked to the security guard who reset and turned them off for us. He said someone had tripped the security alarm, but was oblivious to what could have done it. The alarm system wasn't turned on because of the construction workers. We also used the back door lot and never set off any alarm. Either way, it's just weird it happened at the same time. But the scariest thing was when I saw my paintbrush on top of the paint can on top of the ladder. The brush was still wet. Flat latex paint dries up. A brush in less than 2 hours in air-conditioned environments. I put that brush down at almost 8 p.m. It was 10:45 p.m. when I picked up my brush again. My brush's timeline was only 5 to 10 minutes, whereas my wife and I's was nearly 3 hours. To this day, my wife and I seem to think it may have been an alien encounter or abduction, or some sort of paranormal encounter that nobody seems to remember. When my daughter was almost 3, she was in her new bed on the opposite side of the room that she and her little brother, my son, who was 1, shared. She asked me where the other mommy was. I was confused, as she hadn't been in daycare since she was 6 months old, wasn't in any sort of program, and I was a stay-at-home mom. I asked her what she was talking about, and she said sometimes she sees her other mommy and hands come out of the wall. She said the hands were scary and she did not like the hands. She didn't seem frightened of the other mommy. I didn't press and just let it go and told her good night. I mean, she wasn't even 3 yet, didn't watch TV, and mostly just played with toys, and we went to parks occasionally. That was the extent to her world thus far. Talk of the other mommy went on for about 6 months, but the hand talk went on for another year. She hated the wall that her bed was against. She talked about the scary hands coming out of her wall at least twice a week, but she never felt scared enough to not go to sleep or try to not sleep in her room as long as her brother was in there. We moved after that, and the hand talk was gone. She never really went into detail about any of it. I don't really think she knew how to describe what was going on, and I didn't press the issue. Does anyone have any ideas about what she may have seen? Here is an edit I forgot to add in. I had 2 experiences in this apartment myself, with my bedroom door that was closed with a clothes rack hanging on it violently shaking for about 3 seconds one morning. I thought my husband had come home, but no one was there. My kids were in their rooms sleeping. They had a safety thing on the doorknob, so there's no way it was one of them, and I had no pets. Another incident occurred when my family woke up to our front door being wide open. We never used the front door and it stayed locked. We only used our garage. Nothing was stolen or out of place. This all happened in a safe, quiet area in a suburb. This happened fairly recently. I had a friend who I'll call Jack, and we met when we were 17. I had a huge crush on him. We actually dated for 2 weeks before realizing we were better off as friends. We were best friends for years, and I always felt a deep connection to Jack, even after we lost touch. In 2019, another friend of mine, who I'll call Diane, tried to find Jack on Facebook. We couldn't find him, and even messaged the wrong guy accidentally. Then, a couple months later, Jack found me on Facebook and messaged me out of the blue. We talked and texted and got back in touch. Diane and I wanted to meet up with him, but it was during the height of COVID, so we didn't. Jack and I kept in touch all of 2020. I remember texting him how thankful I was we all had survived 2020. We made it. In January 2021, the lights in my house started flickering one day. The next day, I saw someone walk into my office, and I assumed it was my daughter. But no one was there. More lights flickered. The TV turned on by itself. Diane gave me the number of a medium. I made an appointment for the coming Sunday. Feeling relieved and hopeful, I took a shower before bed. As I cleared my mind under the hot water, I tried to think who would come through when I saw the medium. In my head, I heard Jack's voice say, "She doesn't know I'm gone." I hadn't talked to Jack in a bit and made a mental note to text him in the morning, just to shake this feeling. The next morning, a mutual friend called me to tell me Jack had passed away. He accidentally overdosed on fentanyl. I was crushed. It still hurts. He was such a good friend. I should also note that I have SLI, or sliders, street light interference, and tend to affect electronics and such. So I didn't think much of the lights flickering at first. To this day, I think it was my good friend Jack trying to reach out to me. When I was in primary school, my grandma lived near a cane field. My cousins and uncle lived in the same town, while my mother and I lived further north. So on school holidays, my mom would take us down to visit them, and I would primarily stay at my grandma's house. My cousins would then stay there to visit me. Because of factors like childhood neglect, we kids would be left home alone at night, while our grandma worked and my mom and my uncle would catch up with friends, then go drinking. We thought we were cool because we, at about 10 to 12 years old, and could literally do whatever we wanted. One of those things was my cousin's smoking. She wouldn't smoke in the house, so she would go outside and smoke by the boundary, which was directly across the road in the cane field. She came back inside sobbing, and her sister and I asked what was wrong. She told us there was a thing crouched behind a bin in the yard, and it growled at her. The sister and I thought it was probably a dog, so we went outside to chase it away. However, whatever the F it was not a dog. When we went outside, we could see part of this white thing hiding behind the bin. My dumbass whistled at it and confidently walked up to it, thinking it was a scared, lost dog. I could hear this growling that sounded nothing like a dog, but this weird, throaty noise. I went closer to it because I still thought in my heart of hearts this thing was probably a dog, until I saw a white knee and saw this thing was crouching on two legs. It was white, with no hair, long limbs, skinny and humanoid. The closest I can describe it is the rake. It stood up briefly and made this defensive yell where I covered my face. My cousins screamed, and the thing bounded away on all fours back into the cane field. We told our parents when they got home, and they joked it was probably the landowner's inbred son that they let out at night. Because of the underreaction from our parents, we kind of forgot about it over time. However, when we told our grandma one time, she said one evening when she and her boyfriend were reversing out, she took a wrong turn or hit something. I can't remember. So they both got out, and this white thing was laying flat by the cane field as if it were trying not to be seen. It crouched down lower when they looked at it. Because it terrified them, they pretended not to see it as well. They slowly crept back into the car, pretending it wasn't there. Before the house was sold, and during my early high school years when my mother would take me to see my cousins and uncle, I saw glances of it mainly at night, although you could sense an eerie feeling from the cane field during the day. The times I saw it, I started doing this thing where I would walk around at night listening to my iPod when they first came out. So, when at my grandma's house, I was wandering around the yard when it crawled out from under my grandma's house, then ran back into the field. I would see glances of it from behind bushes and peeking out of the cane at night, so I stopped going outside at night. Whatever it was didn't try to attack us, though it seemed to like chilling at my grandma's house. My grandma often worked at night, so I think it went there to sleep or observe things that it didn't realize me and the other meddling kids were going to find it or notice it. I don't know where it came from or what it wanted, yet asking my grandma because the town was near a rainforest with several caves around. It's speculated that it would come down when the cane was up to venture around the town. I lived in eastern Kentucky for my teenage years, deep in the Appalachian Hills where everyone lives miles from each other in a tiny town. I wanted to tell this because I'm 29 now, and it still affects me every month or so. Where we lived, so far from the city, we didn't have much to do. So we drove around and went ghost hunting or had sleepovers at friends' houses or parties in the woods. This night was in the middle of July. I was 17. We decided to visit this abandoned church the guys were telling us about. Our usual group was 3 guys and 3 girls, including me. One of the guys was with his friend, and we never had service to tell him where we were going, so it was just 5 of us in the car. The abandoned church was in a hollow, far from town into the hills. You turn right off the main road, drive for about 45 minutes down a 1-lane street that curved over creeks and hills until it gets extremely narrow and rural. The guys said once you get over a specific hill, that's when you start feeling odd, like someone was with you. It was also probably around 12 to 1 a.m. by the time we started driving. This area was hot and humid since it was the middle of July. We were in the car laughing and looking around as our driver took us over the creek and through the woods. After about 30 minutes, we make it to that hill they mention, and the car comes to a stop right in the road. They turn the lights off, and we wait and wait. Nothing really happens, which disappointed me. I wanted to see something crazy, like lights or a demon standing in front of us or something. We decided to keep going to the church after a couple of minutes of silence and darkness. The guys were telling us about the last time they stopped at that spot. Apparently, they had a big commotion and thought it would recreate itself in the present. We drove about 10 to 15 minutes, more down this tight road between the mountains. Finally, slowly around a curve, the hills opened up into this clearing with tall grass. It was probably around 1 or 2 acres of field. In the far left of the property was a 2-story stone building that was clearly a church, sitting in the dark. I couldn't stop staring at it, There were trailers in the next field with lights and cars, so it wasn't 100% desolate. I was so excited to see something. I searched the windows, convincing my eyes I might peep a little figure peeping through the darkness. But I had nothing. We parked on this concrete lot area right off the road and got out. The guys convinced us to hike through the tall grass to the building. We go happily. The first story was the basement. The second was the church itself. The guys led us to the steps that went to the second story, through the front doors. I don't remember if we were inside or still standing outside, but our sixth friend pulls up about 10 minutes after us. He said he couldn't get a hold of us where there was no service anywhere. He said someone wrote the initials of the street the church was located into the dirt of his car window, BF, and decided to see, and luckily his hunch was right. We all go in at this point. This was a Southern Baptist type of church. The sanctuary had all the windows broken out. There was a raised stage area where the preacher probably stood with a podium. The pews were all gone, so it was an open room with a back corner closet to the left of the stage, and a small door with stairs to the basement on the right of the stage. There were a couple dead birds laying about the large room. I took it as a bad omen. I'm superstitious in general, and Arab. I immediately thought about Jen, how my dad said they hide in abandoned places. I never asked for permission to go in either. The guys, all three, go into the basement by themselves, and 3 girls stay upstairs to do some ghost hunting. We have our phones as recorders, and we wanted to catch voices. I sit on the stage, the side closer to the closet in the corner. Our more scared girlfriends sat in the middle. They ask the usual, "What's your name? Who are you?" And we have silence as our answer. I get this feeling of cockiness washing over. It is not who I am in general to feel that way, and I can't explain why. I knew better, even at 17, than to challenge things I don't understand. I begin with, "I don't believe anything is here. Why don't you knock on something? Make a sound, do something." We hear a knock. My friend says, "It's gonna follow you home if you don't be careful." And I brush her off. The closet I'm sitting nearest to starts making some subtle sounds. The dead leaves inside are shuffling quietly. We move together, terrified and bracing ourselves. We hear steps from the front doorway of the church, and then steps from the closet. I feel a cold wind, and the steps from the door start running to us while progressively stomping. All 3 of us are screaming. The guys run upstairs and we all meet up again. I don't know why we didn't just run out of the building, but we eventually get back to the cars. One friend said he heard a chorus of people singing from downstairs. One of the girls said they heard a piano while we were regrouping upstairs. We get back to the car and make our way home. The next night I'm home, in my room, safe asleep. I dream a huge black figure with claws comes through our closed front door. It stomps up the steps the same way we heard in the church into my room. It slams my door open, shoving the doorknob into the wall, damaging it. It comes up to me asleep and unable to wake up or move and shoves me out of bed. I wake up on the floor and the door embedded into the wall. My first sleep paralysis dream. I've had them since. Dreams of this thing finding me, standing and staring at me, shoving its hand into my body and dragging out my organs, all while I can't move or scream. It's been years, and the dreams are not as common anymore. I never went back into that building because I truly believe whatever it was did follow me home. We, of course, went back to the church constantly. It became popular. I would wait in my car or whoever's vehicle that took us each time. I would see friends go back in and run out with children chasing behind them in the grass when we didn't have kids with the group. I've seen eyes in my rear view mirror while leaving the hollow. I have seen my long hair being pulled in the car while I waited, or even sitting at home after visiting. I've had paralysis dreams since then, and I believe it was whatever was there that started them. I will never be going back in. And that, dear listeners, is the end of these true paranormal stories. I don't know about you, but some of these actually gave me chills, especially the last one, considering I myself am from Kentucky and have experienced some of those events myself. In closing, if you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you're awake and listening, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, I'll read to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or